Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be starting in a few moments. We just give a few more seconds for people to join. So, hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Welcome to this joint EAL and IET webinar. What I will do
Kev, if you could just unmute, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'll start again. Just because we have a Zoom meeting format for this webinar, I would kindly request if you can keep your cameras off because this webinar will be recorded, and also your microphones on silent. That would be greatly appreciated, ladies and gentlemen. So just to run through, hi, good afternoon. Welcome to this joint EAL and IET webinar for Amendment 2 of the 18th edition wiring regulations. This webinar will be recorded to enable you to review it later on and share with colleagues who may not be able to attend today. Amendment 2 was published on the 28th of March and will be running alongside Amendment 1 until Amendment 1 is withdrawn 6 months later. Therefore, this webinar is to provide you with information on updates to our qualifications to help you transition along with key updates in Amendment 2. Next slide, please, Mike. Now, I just wanted to run through the meeting formats. As already mentioned there, all attendees, if you can remain on silent during the webinar. And as already mentioned, this session is recorded for later circulation. Also, please, can you type your questions that you may have in the chat area, and we'll deal with questions at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please, Mike. So looking at today's agenda, we have welcome and introductions, updates to existing qualifications, forthcoming developments from EAL, an overview of Amendment 2 and the key changes from Richard Giddings. We will then have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. Next slide, please, Mike. Now, to introduce our speakers today, we have Michael Scarrett hosting the chat and the slides, and myself, Kevin Sparrow from EAL, alongside our special guest speaker, Richard Giddings, Senior Electrical Engineer from the IET. Richard works in the Technical Regulations Department of the IET and contributes to the development of BS 7671, IET guidance notes and codes of practice, as well as overseeing day-to-day operations on the technical helpline. Next slide, please, Mike. So first of all, to look at changes to our existing qualifications, we have our 18th edition CPD award, which is the level 3 award in the requirements for electrical installations. With the publication of Amendment 2, it was felt we didn't need a new qualification, but instead we could create a new unit within the existing qualification. So a slightly different approach to what you may have seen previously, when in most cases we have incrementally updated the award. The new unit is called Understand the Requirements of Electrical Installations, ES 7671 2018 with 2022 in brackets. So this will appear on the learner certificate on successful achievement, showing that they are right up to date. There is no general industry need for learners who already hold the qualification to update to Amendment 2. And in fact, they could not resit the same qualification twice with the EAL. However, if learners choose to do so, they may take the unit and the exam as a standalone unit, and they will receive a certificate of unit credit upon completion. So for example, if you have a learner that undertook the 18th edition qualification to Amendment 1 or earlier, they could just register on the unit as a standalone and receive a certificate of unit credit on successful completion. Next slide, please, Mike. The updated qualification manual is available via EAL online services, and it has an updated ruler combination with the new unit. You'll notice that the unit for Amendment 1 will be withdrawn from the qualification at the end of September, and the Amendment 1 unit assessment will be withdrawn at the end of 2022. This runs in the timeframes of the BS 7671 changes. So it is important when registering learners in the 6-month period to select the correct unit, depending on whether the learner has a blue book or brown book. But we will look at this further shortly, and pathway transferring if you need to do it. Next slide, please, Mike. Also within the updated qualification manual is an updated setting specification for the Amendment 2 exam. The only changes are we have reduced the questions from Learning Outcome 7 by 3, and we have increased the questions from Learning Outcome 8 by 3. So a bit of a rejig. So it's still 60 questions. So this is due to inclusion of Part 8 of BS 7671. So with these changes, we do work with the industry and, of course, other awarding organisations for consistency, which is really important. You'll also start to notice within EAL materials, we're going through a rebranding process. So the new qualification materials have been updated to a new house style. Next slide, please, Mike. Now, looking at other qualifications with an integral 18th edition unit, we have the Level 3 Diploma in Electrical Installation, which is for FE-based learners, and the English and Northern Ireland Apprenticeship Qualification, the Level 3 Electro-Technical Qualification, which is the 7345, and also the Electro-Technical Experienced Worker Qualification. These 3 qualifications will have a new Amendment 2 wiring regulations unit incorporated into them from May. Now, importantly, these changes will not affect learners already registered. However, you may have learners already on programme who are registered and working towards at some point taking the integral wiring regulations unit to Amendment 1. So if you need to, you can pathway transfer those learners onto the updated qualification with the Amendment 2 unit. Instructions on how to do this are given in EAL online services, and I've included the details of that on this slide on how to access that via EAL's Hubs Help Centre. So for an example, just a quick example, if you've got a learner registered on the Level 3 Electro-Technical Qualification, let's say they registered in September, they're due to take the wiring regulations unit exam in 2023. You can pathway transfer them for free onto the Amendment 2 version of the qualification with the updated wiring regulations unit. If you do need support with this, please don't hesitate to give customer experience a call. We'd be happy to talk you through this. Next slide, please, Mike. Also, to importantly update, the Level 3 Advanced Diploma in Electrical Installations will also have a new Amendment 2 wiring regulations unit. So this is the graded qualification. This will be incorporated into it in May, but due to the synoptic grading of this qualification, importantly, the pathway transfer facility will not work. Therefore, we have currently put a block on registration of this qualification until May, just to ensure any new registrations will be on the most up-to-date version of this qualification. The qualification in most cases is taken over an academic year, However, you may have learners undertaking it over a different period of time. So therefore, learners who are already on programme and are yet to take the wiring regs unit to Amendment 1 should work towards completing the unit in 2022. And if this is not possible, then they should take the other optional unit within the qualification for overseeing and organising. Next slide, please, Mike. Now, looking at our 3 Level 3 Inspection and Testing Awards, we have updated the existing unit with new content for diverted neutral current. So this is in relation to an unwanted current that can be imported or exported to the installation due to an open pen conductor on the supply system. We will also be updating the centre practicals to include a quick check of this to embed the procedure within learners and raise awareness. So this is something the IET have been quite keen for awarding organisations to put into their qualifications. Also, where relevant, mark the centre marked practical to the IET publications and documents the learner is using, i.e. to Amendment 1 or Amendment 2. And from September the 28th, learners must take the practical to Amendment 2. Next slide, please, Mike. Other qualifications are currently being updated to Amendment 2, and details of which publications to be used in assessments and marking are given in a document outlining this in the link on this slide. I'll also drop the documents into the chat, but in summary, you can use documents to Amendment 1 or Amendment 2, and from the 28th of September, use documents to Amendment 2 only. Also, to support you in technical changes, the NIC EIC have provided us with their connections article, which is a great source of information and also has a knowledge test at the end. And I'll also drop that into the chat. Next slide, please, Mike. Now, I just wanted to share with you other qualifications which may be of interest. We have fairly recently launched a Level 3 award in the commissioning, handover and servicing of fire detection and alarm systems to BS 5839 Part 1. So this is a CPD type of award, which is a fantastic qualification for existing electricians and fire professionals commissioning non-domestic fire alarms. Assessment is via a centre-marked written paper and a centre-marked practical. This is the first qualification of its type, and we developed it with Tom Brooks, who you may recognise from his Dr. Zeus article from one of the trade magazines, and worked with the Fire and Security Association. We are currently also developing a new qualification for an apprenticeship standard in England for domestic electricians, called the Level 3 Electrotechnical Dwellings Qualification. More information on this qualification will follow very shortly, as we're working hard to develop this rapidly over the next few months. It is close to the existing apprenticeship qualification in England, but we'll focus on dwellings and associated new technologies. We're also developing a Level 3 award in the electrical energy storage systems, which is essentially battery storage for electrical installations. Assessment will be a centre-marked practical and an online exam. And finally, another qualification, which I'm really excited about, is a Level 3 award in the requirements for fire detection and alarm systems in dwellings. So another great CPD award for existing electricians and to help improve fire safety in dwellings. Next slide, please, Mike. So thank you for listening to me, and I'll be delighted to take questions at the end. But in the meantime, I'd like to hand over to Richard Giddings for a technical update on Amendment 2. Thank you. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're enjoying what you're hearing and seeing so far. And what I'll do in the next few slides is to run through the main bullet point changes that Amendment 2, the new Brown Book, has brought in. There's no way that I can cover everything that's in there, but I've selected, the main sort of show-stopping points that have come up, the ones that we're getting questions on, and the ones that we know most people are interested. So if we could go on to the next slide, Mike, please. I'll talk about the transition from Amendment 1 to Amendment 2. this time the wording that they've used in the introduction to Amendment 2 is somewhat different to what you people would have seen before in previous amendments and new additions. The wording has been very carefully chosen following prolonged debate and discussion within our JPEL committees and specialist work groups, where we've listened to all sectors of the industry. And it won't surprise you to learn that there were many hours spent, formulating the words that you'll see on that introduction. The first point to bring into context is that Amendment 2 was issued Monday 2 weeks ago, the 28th of March. The Brown Book came out, and as it says, can be implemented immediately. It then goes on to talk about Amendment 1 will be withdrawn on the 27th of September 2022. So the term withdrawn and the implementation date of it being immediate is quite new. In the past, you'll probably remember we had words along the lines of, talking about installations designed before or designed after a particular date, or, installed before or installed after, again, a particular date. But historically, those types of words and the way they've been set caused problems. In many cases, the problems were of contractual nature, and BSI and IET, as joint publishers of BSM 671, were in many cases wrongfully and needlessly being dragged into contractual arguments, particularly on projects that were happening during the phase changeover period, which was normally always 6 months. But equally, on larger projects where it was quite common and always will be to have a project that may straddle 2 or sometimes even 3 editions of the regulation between its first design and its final, install, verification and test on site. So all those matters historically had caused problems. There were other issues that I can recall with my work in the past on it. We had house builders, with a standard design for a house who were able to say, well, legally, we designed the electrical installation for this new house 8 years ago, and they were silly sort of examples, of contractual nature, where in the past, they were trying to still purport to use plastic consumer units, some years after the requirement had come in for metal consumer units. That was a good example. So this time around, the wording is different, and it follows what BSI do in all the rest of their British Standard publications. They use this term withdrawn. Now, in terms of what does withdrawn mean, BSI themselves publish very useful information on their website. If you use your search engine of choice and go into BSI and type in maybe withdrawn standards, there's at least 3 simple, easy to follow guidance documents that BSI have produced over the last 3 years or so that talk about why with standards become withdrawn, what their legal status is, and how they are used. So this time, where you've got questions about, what does withdrawn mean, we would draw your attention to, the wording on the BSI site. They're easy to follow articles, and if you can get hold of them, it would be useful information for you to pass on to your learners and students. So summing up on this transaction and transition over to Amendment 2, ultimately, it's a contractual matter between all parties involved on a contract. It doesn't matter if it's a small scale domestic kitchen refit, or maybe a rewire, or equally, it's the same that it could be applied if it was a large shopping centre, hospital, or a big commercial project. Ultimately, in every case, it's a contractual matter for all parties engaged with the electrical installation to communicate fully with each other, make clear, where the issue of the standards has changed and what the relevant issues are, and to get agreement in, preferably in writing, between all parties as to what route forward the client wants to go with. ultimately, you know, it's all about communication. And dare I say it, unfortunately, particularly on larger projects, sometimes these matters do have to end up going back to contract law to resolve. So quite some change here, and it's important to get this information across. Okay, next slide, please then, Mike. Okay, moving on. First thing to pick up in the book, the Brown book, is wherever there is any change, either something that's new or some amendment, at the page you're looking at, if you look on the right-hand side of that page, you will see in the margin, the right-hand margin, vertical line, you know, either a full line or a little dotted line. That basically tells you the text, the wording to the left of that line is either new or amended. So straight away, if you open at any page in that new book and you look in the right-hand margin and you see the little vertical line, that's your clue that there's something to the left of that has changed. So moving through into some of the main bullet points. I say we can't cover all of them, but I'll just cover in these next few slides the main ones. First thing to pick up, and we're more or less going through the book in page order here, is definitions, where we've got, and always have done, you know, at the front of the book, you know, a series of definitions in part 2. There are many new ones, and you'll see those lines that I was talking about. Lots of them, admittedly, are relating to our new work in our chapter 82, which I'll be covering later, which is prosumers installations. Prosumer installation, incidentally, which I'll be coming back to, is an installation that both produces and consumes electricity. You know, it could be an installation that's got maybe a DNO, you know, LV public supply coming in, and perhaps in its most simple terms have solar PV up on the roof. But, you know, with advent of battery storage and other such systems, prosumers installations are things that will really be, you know, taking off in the next few years. So not surprisingly here, in the new part 2, there's lots of definitions that in many cases you probably won't have heard before, and many of them are only related to the prosumer installations. Some of those include connected mode, consumer of electricity, direct feeding mode, distribution system operator, DSO, distributor, electrical energy management system, EAMS, island mode, load shedding, operating mode, PEI, prosumers electrical installation, PEI collective, PEI shared, and reverse feeding mode. So all of those that I've just mentioned are mainly to do with the prosumer installations covered in chapter 82 at the back of the book. There are some others, though, that are relevant to any installation, not too many. Some of them include AFDD, arc fault detection device, direct lightning strike, emergency switching off, open circuit maximum voltage relating to PV systems, and protected escape route. So those are the main ones, some of which we'll be picking up in the next few slides. Next slide then, Mike, please. We're now moving into protection against electric shock. There's been some changes here, not many, but the main two I've pulled up with those reg numbers that are shown on the slide. The regulation 411.3.1.2 talks about main protective bonding conductors. There's a new note in that reg, and it specifically talks about the very common situation where we have plastic incomers, often rising up from the ground, very usually, you know, water or gas, and that then connect onto metallic installation pipe that then goes off into the building itself. The previous version of the 18th edition talked admittedly about a plastic insert, but to be honest, the more common situation was the plastic incomer and the transition to metal pipework within the building. What that regulation is effectively saying is that such metal pipes that go off into the building do not normally require protective bonding. We have guidance elsewhere in the industry, in some of our guidance notes and guidance notes that we know our fellow contributors have also produced for their organisations, that talk about how this particular issue can be checked and proven if need be. Some of it talks about carrying out an installation test between the main earthing terminal and the piece of metal that's considered. And some of the other guidance, which is more practical, talks about a visual inspection to see if any section of that pipe is considered to become earthy. Maybe, you know, pipework, you know, that dips back down into the ground, perhaps through a solid concrete floor and may pop up in a garage or something like that. So some changes on main protective bonding. The other area of electric shock protection that's had some changes is quite big and will affect many installations, and this concerns RCD protection at 30 milliamp for socket outlets. Regulation 411.3.3 is an existing regulation that talked about socket outlets needing RCD protection, but it's now been changed, and it uses a new concept of what we call an external influence category of capability of persons. And we're using the categories BA1, BA2, and BA3, which aren't actually new. They've been in the appendices for the regulations for some years. But this new revised regulation talks about using the category of person to distinguish where RCD protection must be provided and where it can be omitted, albeit in a small category of installation by use of a risk assessment. What it's effectively saying is, yes, the risk assessment process, provided it's had the input with the client and an electrically skilled person, such as the designer, can only in a very small percentage of installations consider omitting the RCD with a risk assessment, but only in installations where the sockets in question can only be accessed by skilled or instructed persons. So think there issues like data centers, control rooms, and other such things where general persons, children or disabled persons would not normally be present. So some changes there. It's not all about the building type anymore. It's about the type of person who would be considered to be using the sockets that are in question. Next slide, please, then, Mike. Chapter 42 covers protection against thermal effects. Regulation 422 talks about areas where particular risks of fire exist. Not surprisingly, a lot of work was done in chapter 42, particularly, but not solely due to the aftermath of the Grenfell disaster, but also changes in international standards that ultimately affect, you know, the requirement of the technical intent of our standards here in the UK. One requirement is to have fire safety design issues in the electrical installation to be documented and included in a fire safety manual. It's fair to say that even quite qualified and experienced electrical installation designers are not fire experts. Fire expertise is quite unique and subject to many years training and experience. And many electrical installers, let alone designers, wouldn't really, in the eyes of the law, be considered to be a fire safety designer. So the area to consider here is where we're talking in such areas, particular risks of fire, it's essential that a fire safety expert forms part of the design team. The electrical designer alone should not and cannot be the person who's expected to make these decisions. Electrical designers therefore have to work in conjunction with and more closely with fire safety experts, maybe architects or fire safety practitioners in their own right. Regulation 422.2 talks about the new term protected escape routes and the electrical requirements within them. The term protected escape route is, although a new term in 7671, has come about from other well-established standards such as BS quadruple 9, BS 9999 and BS 9991, which talk about fire safety in relation to design of buildings. The requirement here is to clear up the ambiguity that has arisen in recent years about the term escape route. Talk to any fire safety practitioner or architect, and it could be quite rightfully argued that any part of a building forms an escape route. It depends where that person is, sitting or working, and the exit to get him to the safe outside the building. It's an escape route. Protected escape routes and the term is quite different, however. You've got to think of them as effectively fire sterile areas, areas that are designed purely to act as an escape route. Typically, think of hotels or large commercial buildings. They won't look pretty. There'll be bare concrete walls, bare steps, no furnishings, soft furnishings, or other things that could easily combust and impede escape with smoke or flame. So protected escape routes are important. And our regulations here are now talking specifically about electrical requirements within them. Things like lack of plastic or easily combustible materials. Things like not having electrical installations in that protected escape route unless they're to do with the safety aspects, such as fire alarms, lighting, or emergency lighting. And things like cable containment systems. Not surprisingly, there's quite a bit of mention made about the effects of cables burning and giving off smoke, as indeed cable management systems doing likewise. So the BS 7671 requirements for installations in these protected escape routes maintain the concept of a fire sterile area. And as I've said, permit only essential electrical components and wiring in those areas. The next big point here is 421.1.7, AFD Protection. I predict in years to come, this Brown Amendment 2 will be remembered for many as the regulation which effectively introduced and mandated AFD protection in certain key parts of electrical installations. It isn't necessarily going to be a popular regulation, and it's had many tens, even hundreds of hours of debate about how the words have been formulated. But don't forget, BS 7671, right from its earliest days in the 1880s, was all about limiting and avoiding the risks of fire from an electrical installation. So AFDs and their inclusion now in this Amendment 2 is a natural progression many years later as to the basic concepts of what BS 7671 is all about, minimizing or avoiding the effects of fire that may arise from an electrical installation. AFDs, of course, aren't new. We had them as a recommendation in the 18th edition, and they've been used in many other countries under other countries' standards for quite some years now, but they're relatively new here in the UK. Regulation 421.1.7 requires AFD protection on single phase circuits that supply socket outlets not exceeding 32 amps in. And the 4 key areas are higher risk residential buildings, HRRBs. And there's a note under the reg to say that, this term HRRB, it's clear, is a term that may be changed in terms of other work going on with the government about fire safety. And at any time, it's important to get the most up-to-date definition of an HRRB. The second bullet point is HMOs, houses in multiple occupation. The third is purpose-built student accommodation. And the fourth is care homes. All 4 of those types of building are considered and have evidence to suggest that the effects of fire are far greater in terms of overall safety and the ability of people to escape. That is the reason why AFDs have been introduced at the present time to cover socket circuits up to 32 amps. The requirement for socket circuits, incidentally, is because having the AFD at the source of the circuit not only protects the circuit wiring, but also, of course, appliances that may be plugged in, which are in many cases just as prone, to causing a fire safety hazard as the fixed wiring. Now, in other types of premises, the same type of circuits, i.e. socket outlets up to 32 amp, are recommended to have AFD protection. So as a recommendation, the designer, the installer, if he's acting as a designer, is that really effectively duty bound to give the option to his or her client to benefit from this protection. And it will be the client's decision whether they take it or not. It's a recommendation in those areas. Okay, then, Mike, next slide, please. Protection against overvoltages or voltage disturbances. SPDs, surge protective devices. Not a new concept, not a new concept at all. SPDs, in my past as a designer, I was specifying in certain buildings on projects, even 20 years ago, where there was effectively a risk of usually electronic equipment, either being damaged or malfunctioning if the voltage supply, exceeds or has spikes, above its norm. Let's face it, electronics are everywhere. In the year 2022, even the most small standard domestic dwelling would have electronics in it, with the advent of LED lighting, controls, smart controls, etc. Electronics are everywhere. And a little standing joke I always have is, show me an installation that doesn't have electronics in, and I'll probably point to a garden shed with a 60-watt GLS lamp in and give you that as the answer. So electronics are here to stay. And with other work that's going on, EV charging, prosumer installations, smart homes, smart technology, efficient lighting, the use of electronics can only increase. We've made changes in section 443 covering how SPDs are to be brought to an installation. It's been simplified. Gone is the need now to establish a CRL, calculated risk assessment calculation, about the likelihood of either lightning strikes or other transients. All of that's gone. SPDs effectively are required. It's a shall, a definite must-do requirement in all buildings where the consequence of a transient overvoltage could lead to, and there's 3 bullet points: serious injury to or loss of human life, failure of a safety service as defined in part 2, significant financial or data loss. So if you have any of those 3 categories within your building, whatever your building is, there's no choice. SPDs are required to protect those parts of the installation. In all other cases, the SPD says again, shall be provided unless the owner of the installation accepts the risk and declares that such protection is not required. Now, this is rather a unique reg because there's not many regulations in 7671 that give the option of the owner deciding whether to go with it or not. It's a shall provision that you've got to put them in, but it's the owners deciding if they don't want them. So of course, best practice here as a designer or a practitioner undertaking design is to sit down with the client, once again communicate with them, tell them what SPDs are all about, and give them the option of either having them or not having them. Best practice is to record this discussion, and a lot of the well-known certification bodies and trade associations such as the ECA and others, I know have standard documentation that they can use with their members and their clients in this position to record, the instruction possibly not to have them. Because as always, as a colleague once said to me, clients have selective memory. They may tell you one day that they don't want it because they're looking at the bottom line. And then when they've suffered loss or damage or their insurance company won't pay out, they'll be trying to claw, that claim back against the electrical designer. Okay, next slide then, please, Mike. Chapter 51 talks about identification and notices, warning labels, warning signs, stickers, and all of those sort of things. There's changes that have been made. First of all, in table 51. Table 51 is the table that identifies the colours of conductors for circuit wiring, ELV, LV, control wiring, etc. We've had some changes in there, admittedly mainly relating to DC earthed and unearthed power circuits. Rather surprisingly, red, white and blue, rather patriotic in this Jubilee year, is being used once again for these applications of DC earthed and unearthed power circuits. AC wiring hasn't changed, fortunately. Also, if you glance down that table and look near the bottom where it talks about control circuits, ELV and other applications, a blast from my past came back to see me on this, and all of a sudden the single colour green, which has been absent from the regulations since 1978, has now come back as an accepted colour, but this time as one option for use as a line conductor in such control circuits, ELV and other applications. Looking at Appendix 11, we see that we now have some common warning and user instructions and labels that are referred to throughout the rest of the book, all neatly now put in one place. In that appendix, we have details of the font size, the actual wording to be used, as well as the colours for the particular labels. So Appendix 11, is heavily updated to reflect that in many cases, labels can be and often will be produced on electronic equipment, such as label printing machines or computers. They're not always the rolls of labels that you'll pick up at the wholesalers anymore. Another change that's been made about labelling concerns the periodic inspection label, the one where we write the data when we last tested it and the suggested date for the next test, and the RCD test label. Both of those labels can now be omitted in domestic properties, provided that that information is provided on the certificate for the installation that's given to the client. That information is normally, if you look at the model forms, as information that's known as guidance for recipients that's on the back of the model forms. So if you've got your people using their own software or producing their own forms, particularly if they're relating to domestic dwellings, make sure the guidance for recipients notes from the model forms of Amendment 2 are there. It enables the stickers to be avoided on the consumer unit. That information and that change incidentally came back from a lot of complaints that the industry had picked up through certification assessments, where very often the electrical contractor took his inspector back to often a domestic dwelling, a new build, and when he got back there, found that the labels that he claimed to have put there, had been removed, or in some cases painted over with emulsion. And the householder, would quite often openly admitted, I didn't want those ugly, scruffy looking labels in full view in my hall or cloakroom. So a bit of practicality had come in there. And finally, the colour mix label, which we first saw appear back in 2004, when our 2-year transition to go to the harmonised colours for AC fixed wiring came in, has now been deleted. It was considered after long and lively debate that the change is now 16 to 18 years ago, and anybody in the industry who is involved with such work by now really ought to know what the colours are for AC wiring. Okay, next slide then, Mike, please. Chapter 53. Chapter 53 covers protection, isolation, switching and control. It's a long and quite laborious chapter to read, I will admit, and a lot of work went in on that when the 18th edition was formulated, but it covers an awful lot of the main concepts of the majority, if not all, electrical installations. 2 main bullet points to come out here are worth looking at. One of them is Regulation 531.3.3, which now effectively prohibits the use of type AC RCDs on anything other than a circuit that serves fixed equipment where it is known that only resistive AC type loads with no DC components whatsoever will exist. Again, going back to my comment a few slides ago about a modern electrical installation, such equipment is getting fewer and further and more rare. You may have maybe some resistive heating, an immersion heater, electric heating, cooker, which is, yes, in itself an AC resistive load. But very often such equipment comes with electronic control, does it not? Think of the Lot 20 stipulations for heating appliances that came in a few years ago. So AC type RCDs can be used on resistive equipment, but anywhere else where there's any likelihood at all of DC components being present, AC RCDs are effectively now outlawed with these new regulations. So effectively, it makes a type A RCD as what I may call the new entry level for RCD type protection for general purpose use, particularly for socket circuits, where the designer will never know what may be plugged into any particular socket on that circuit in years to come. Very briefly, what this AC business was all about can be best described, by relating to an old RCD and loop tester that was developed some years ago by a well-known company, which had orange rubbery cased test equipment. I won't name names, but I'm sure many of you will remember them. They had a proprietary facility on that loop tester called D-Lock, which enabled very usefully, I may add, for you to take a loop test without causing the RCD to trip. The way it did it was the test instrument injected DC down the circuit for a few seconds and then subjected the AC test, and of course the DC blinded it. Another area in chapter 53 is 537.4, regulation and table, which details the suitability of devices for isolation, switching off and functional switching. It's now been updated, and it includes AFDDs, starters, and at last the recognition that socket outlets, RCD socket outlets and fuse spurs to BS7288 are now included. Next slide then, please, Mike. Verification and certification. One area of change is regulation 433.3 covering insulation resistance testing. Again, recognizing the proliferation of electronics and electronics causing either damage or, influencing the readings when you're doing an insulation resistance test. This regulation effectively is, requiring a two-stage test to be undertaken. The cables themselves at 500 volts, and once everything is connected, a final test at 250 volts. Important to note that in both cases, the CPC of the circuit under test must be recorded and connected onto the earth bar. The model forms in Appendix 6 have also been updated to change reflections in the book generally. New columns, tweaks here and there, and the revisions to the tables that go with them. Another change in verification and testing concerns two regulations, 643.7.1 and 643.8 regarding RCD testing, requiring now just a ×1 test at I delta N, an AC test, regardless of the RCD type. So garner the needs for ×12, ×5, ramp tests, 0 and 180, although of course those other tests can be used for fault finding. Next slide, please, Mike. Solar photovoltaic systems, section 712. This section has had a considerable rewrite to align with the harmonized standards and the IC and the Senelet requirements. All I can really say usefully today is if you have people working in this area, this section needs much study. To try and summarize the changes, it's mainly recognizing that solar PV systems can and will be connected as key players in prosumer electrical installations. Here we are again. And as such may be configured to work as standalone, connected in parallel with the normal DO supply or a switched alternative. So a lot of change there. If solar's your thing, you really need to read this section. Next slide, please, Mike. EV charging installations. Fortunately, unlike solar PV, not many changes at all, and you won't see those vertical sidebars much in evidence here. But there are a few changes. One of them, not surprisingly, continues along the lines of dealing with that thorny subject of PME supplies being used to serve equipment outdoors. 722.411.4.1 is the reg that gives options for the designer where PME is used to serve equipment outdoors. And now the indent 1, which was using the three-phase current balance, has been deleted because at last, finally, they all recognized that to try and make that work in the real world was nigh on impossible. Another change talks about the requirements for protector devices associated with PME and the broken pen conductor to be compatible for use in a prosuming installation if that installation is disconnected from the usual DNO supply. Next slide, please, Mike. So finally, in my set of slides about the technical content, I'm going to briefly tell you about chapter 82. This is completely new, all brand new, and it's very interesting chapter in that the style it's written in, when you look at it, straight away you'll think this is not normal regulations parlance and speak here. It's more likely really seen at the moment, let's be fair, as probably a warm-up act as to what will happen and come our way in the future. Chapter 82 defines what a prosumer's electrical installation is, how we're going in terms of the direction of future travel with regards how LV electrical installations operate and is supplied with energy. Historically, we had just a DNO supply, maybe sometimes with a backup generator to supply an installation, with the utility company or the DNO in charge of centralized energy production, which was adapted to demand variation. Our new chapter 82 sets out the framework for future installations to be compatible with existing and future methods to deliver safe electrical energy to current using equipment, either from a public network or from local sources. This is an area of the regulations which will certainly develop in future amendments and additions. Next slide then, please, Mike. So finally, just summing up here, and a shameless plug for our IET Academy, endorsed by EAL, the IET's online course for 7671 Amendment 2, available to book through our Academy on the details there. We wanted you to update you as to how you can undertake CPD with the IET Academy, and we do have a variety of excellent online courses, including one for Amendment 2 updates that I can recommend. They're paid for courses, but of course they attract IET CPD hours, and more importantly here today are endorsed by EAL. So effectively, that's my slide set done. Hope you found it of use, and I'll hand you back over to Kevin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. That was excellent and very informative. Now we are at 27 minutes past 2, so potentially some of the delegates today may have to get back to work. So hopefully we'll get through some of the questions that have been put on the chat. If you do have to go on the hour, don't worry, we will circulate questions and answers afterwards. So I'm going to hand over to Michael Scarrett, who's been monitoring the chat, and we'll see how many we get. I'll see a few. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Kev. Yeah, one question from Marcus here. Will there be any changes to 5175 solar, 8231 level 4 design, or 3929 electrical vehicle?
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'll take that. So for the solar PV qualification, that's just been reviewed. But obviously in light of what Richard's been talking about today, I think it's prudent to go back and look at that to see how we can include any more information within that particular award, you know, for example, in relation to the special locations and prosumers electrical installations, but it still is recognised and meets MCS requirements. For the level 4 design, yes, we will be, I'm aiming to develop a new project for that this year. So if any of you wanted to get involved or have any suggestions or in relation to that level 4 project, please let us know, drop it into the chat, or certainly get in contact with me afterwards. Was that, did I answer the right question there, Mike?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, another question from Marcus here, Kev. Will there be 2 qualifications for the INT, as in when do we deliver to the new GN3?
Okay, excellent. Okay, Marcus, well, you can actually deliver to the new, utilize the new guidance note 3 right away, and just mark the learner's practical with regard to the Amendment 1 version or the Amendment 2 versions of the guidance note 3 documents. The exam will be neutral to both editions, and then we will start introducing you know, Amendment 2 biased questions over due course. I think I put some information in the document in the chat, which will explain more in detail.
Great, thanks, Kev. Question from Mark here. Is there a last date of certification for the 601-7345 and the 501-1605 where the student has achieved Amendment 1?
No, there won't be. So if they have achieved Amendment 1 or they're going to achieve, so in the 601-752, level 3 electrotechnical qualification, yeah, if they've already achieved that wiring regs unit or they're on course to complete it this year, no, not at all, because the qualification could take 4 years to complete. And and obviously they may, in the case of the 1605, need to complete their AM2 as well. So no, we will not be closing certification on that beyond the the date on the regulatory systems. So nothing to worry about on that front.
Great, thanks, Kev. Question from David here. Does having a smoke alarm count as a safety service and therefore require a SPD?
I can answer that one for him. Very good question. We've had this question, not surprisingly, continually since the book appeared back on the 28th. Safety service, as defined in part 2, clearly says an electrical system for electrical equipment provided to protect or warn persons in the event of hazard or essential to their evacuation from a location. There's two schools of thought here. How anyone can argue that a smoke alarm or a carbon monoxide alarm in a domestic dwelling is not defined as a safety service from that, is beyond most people. So it's fair to say that on a new installation, guidance at the present time, which may change, is that definitely on a new installation, you'd be considering putting SPDs in, which you probably would be doing anyway. The problem, as many others have pointed out, is that on a rewire or, a partial upgrade, where perhaps the benefits of simply adding smoke alarms where they don't exist could sometimes be jeopardized in terms of going forward, if the practicalities of trying to implement SPDs on an existing installation are taken into account. So safety service very clearly defined, SPDs ought to be going in, but currently the industry is aware that the practicalities on an existing installation and bringing SPDs in, as well as the smoke detector, may cause practical problems and could put people off, which is a serious concern. It's being raised at JPEL as a big issue. It is also being discussed and debated at the Wiring Regulations Advisory Group, RAG, which the IET and other key players contribute to. And it's hoped there will be some definitive guidance appearing within the next few months, particularly on retrofit existing installations. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a comment from Richard here. So there is a rumour that any installations without RCD protection will be graded as a C2 going forward on EICRs.
I can answer that one as well. We always say rumours, statistics, damn lies, and now, of course, YouTube and social media, taken to be needed with a pinch of salt. To be honest, nothing has actually changed on EICRs and the way that EICRs are conducted in terms of it's down to the expertise, engineering, judgment of the person undertaking the test and the inspection to compare what he or she has found in an installation versus what the current requirements are in the addition of the regulations that's being used as the datum. That process hasn't changed. We can only point you in the direction of the excellent free to download best practice guide 4 that's produced by Electrical Safety First, where typically it talks about typical condition codings and their application to domestic or similar as guidance, of course. That process, or rather that guidance, is in the process of being updated, but I would stress here that nothing in terms of the way an EICR being undertaken or how the expertise of the person undertaking that test and use of their judgment has changed. So there's no one fixed answer. It will depend on the installation and what the inspector sees on the day he's doing the test.
Thank you, Richard. Question from Phil here. On an EICR, would a smoke alarm present only generate a C3? with regards to an SPD requirement.
Again, I can only go back to what we've just discussed a question or so ago. Currently, if that person undertaking that test, sees the absence of a smoke alarm or the absence of an SPD on a smoke alarm, knowing what the defined conditions are of the safety service, engineering judgment has to be taken into account. Would SPDs, for example, that could be relatively easily fitted at low cost and perhaps almost certainly protect that smoke alarm from malfunction or lack of function, be a benefit. So, engineering judgment has to be looked into. And of course, it would be good practice if the concern was such to maybe speak to the manufacturer of the particular smoke alarm in question, to get their view on the inclusion or the omission of an SPD and how their device may be affected. So there's lots of different factors, as there are with many things on EICR. So we can't give a finite answer here. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And there's no more questions at the moment, so that's it for now.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. I think we can move on to the last slide. And if any of you do have questions occur to you after the session today, please do get in touch. I would suggest with more technical inquiries, you can get in touch with Richard at the IET email address there. Hope you don't mind, Richard, on that front. And,
no,
excellent,
that's fine.
Excellent. And obviously, if you want to know more about our qualifications, there's lots of changes going on at the moment across the nation. So please do get in touch, and we'll always look forward to hearing from you. But that then draws our presentation today to a close. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining. It's been great that you have made the time for this, and we will circulate this webinar with a link afterwards. So from me and everybody, thank you very much and hope you have a great day.